Well, hello there. I didn't see you come in. Make yourself at home. Have a drink. While I give some attention to some underappreciated characters and storylines that I personally love. And I hope you grow to love as well.
Hey there, everybody, and welcome back. Today we are reading Swamp Thing number 153, and just a little catch up on what's been going on. We are at the very beginning of a storyline called River Run that is actually like a story within a story, because River Run is a book of short stories that was written by a girl named Anna who killed herself, but she has somehow been cursed to actually live as a character in those stories until they can be completed and finished. So she has asked Swamp Thing for help with this. So in the last issue, we were at chapter 1, which was City of the Dead, and that was kind of like a gumshoe detective kind of story, but also there was some supernatural weird stuff in it, like zombies, and there was like a de-evolution monster. And both Swamp Thing and Anna were in the story, and Swamp Thing did end up wrapping that story up. I don't know how it ended the first time, but Swamp Thing was able to help the de-evolution monster accept his fate. So right now we're just going through each one of these short stories, and this week is chapter 2. And first things first with this issue, we got the cover. This is a very provocative cover. We got some red and white stripes in the background with a circle in the middle of white, and inside that circle is a swastika that is filled with stars, so it kind of resembles the American flag. And laying on top of that swastika is Swamp Thing, and he looks to be in pain. He's screaming out, and this is also a Brian Bolland cover. And we see on the front of this issue that this is written by Mark Miller with art by Phil Hester and Kim DeMulder. Or at least that's what it says on the cover. On the inside, you can tell the art is different than usual. And it also says that there's a guest artist named Chris Weston. So I'm not sure why they put that on the cover, but Chris Weston is definitely the artist in this story. And we start off on the first page in Washington, D.C. And from inside the building, we see two people. Both have blonde hair and blue eyes, and they are a man and a woman. And they are both dressed in khaki Nazi uniforms. On the wall, we can see pictures of Hitler and swastika flags. And the man is standing by a couple of German shepherds. And the woman is saying, "Last I heard, he was still browsing the Forbidden Library. They say he's quite a reader." And the man says, "Tell me about it. You got a cigarette while I'm waiting?" So she pulls out some cigarettes and offers him one and says, "Be my guest, Carl. One less nail in my coffin." And as he lights it, he says, "This is ridiculous. Air Force One's been fueled and ready to go for 40 minutes. And she says, "Who cares? At least it gives you a good excuse to hang around and talk to me." So she's kind of flirting with him, but he doesn't seem to be returning it as he says, "Yeah, well, the dogs are getting pretty restless. Maybe I should wait outside with the others. Thanks again for the cigarette." Then him and his dogs leave the room as she kind of looks at him longingly and says, "Sure, catch you later. Heil Hitler and all that." Then we cut to the outside of the White House and we see a giant blimp floating above it, and it's covered with swastikas, and it has a big one on it, and it says Air Force One. We also see a bunch more guards out on the front lawn, and we see the name of this issue is Chapter 2 of River Run, Twilight of the Gods. Then we turn the page and we cut to another area inside the White House, and it is a giant library. And there's a man in a suit who's looking through the books, and we can see some of the titles, and a lot of them are classics like The Time Machine, or 2000 Leagues Under the Sea, and The Trial by Kafka. But there's also some more provocative books like Brave New World and The Psychology of Fascism. So this man begins to take the books off the shelf, and this guy is an older white man who has graying dark hair. And as he takes his stack and begins flipping through the book on fascism, another man walks in and says, "Mr. President." And this startles the older man who's the president, and he drops the books on the floor. And as he bends down to pick them up, he says, "Damn it, Patrick. Do you have to creep up on me like that?" And then Patrick walks in and says, "Sorry to disturb you, sir. Everyone was kind of wondering where you were." And as the president bends down to pick up the books, he begins handing them to Patrick to stack up, and he says, "I was looking for something decent to read. It's such a dull flight back to Little Rock." And we see one of the books that he hands Patrick has the word slavery on it. And Patrick looks at it and says, "What in the name of God?" And Patrick is staring at the back of the book, which has a picture of the author, who is black, and he is very shocked by this. And the president kind of blows it off as he stands up and says, "It's a Negro, Patrick, a black man. I understand they were quite common before the war." And Patrick is just looking at the book in shock and says, "It's horrible." And I guess Patrick can't focus on anything else, so the president takes the other books from his hands, puts them on a table, and he walks over to a window, and he looks out of it, and he says, "Life must have been so strange in those days. So many different creeds and colors living together. It's hard to imagine now, huh?" And Patrick adjusts his glasses and nervously says, I don't think I'm authorized to discuss this, sir. Can we change the subject? And the president says, Of course, Patrick, I'm sorry. It's easy to forget the rules when you're surrounded by relics from another age. You'd better get to work on my speech. The Fuhrer arrives first thing in the morning. Then we turn the page and we cut to Berlin, Germany, to I guess the Chancellor's house, and we hear a woman say, Tell me the truth, Alois. Do I look fat in this dress? The president's wife is so slim and pretty, I don't want to look stupid beside her. Then we cut to the inside of a bedroom where Chancellor Alois is getting dressed along with his wife. And of course, we're seeing like swastikas and Nazi paraphernalia all over this place. And Chancellor Alois is an older man who basically looks like a graying Hitler. He's got the mustache. He just looks a bit older. He's got more wrinkles. He's got glasses on, and he's got a flat top instead of the Hitler comb-over hair. And he's looking at the woman as he's getting dressed, and he says, You look beautiful, Norma Jean. Much slimmer than she does. And Norma Jean says, I've been looking through your file on this new president. It's kind of worrying, isn't it? I mean, he's been asking an awful lot of strange questions lately. And as the chancellor puts on a tie, he says, He's a good man, darling. The American people adore him. You should know by now, I don't make mistakes. And then he walks over to her as he puts on his coat, and he helps Norma Jean put on her coat. And then he stares at her lovingly, and she says, Honestly, Alois, you can be such a little dictator. Sometimes you sound just like your father. And I should describe Norma Jean. She is an older white woman with blonde hair, of course. And she's a little heavy set and looks to be maybe in her mid-50s. So as they walk out of their room, down some stairs, they walk by a bunch of soldiers. And Alois says, I must admit, I am a little uncomfortable with this golem project he initiated. Mining the world's psychic energy reserves is an interesting theory, but very dangerous. We should never forget that the golem is a Yiddish legend. The Jews hoped this spirit would arise in their darkest hour, and we should be thankful it did not. Invoking such old magic now is foolish, even as an alternative source of power. And as the Chancellor and Norma Jean walk out of the Chancellor's palace, a man in uniform runs up and says, Excuse me, Madam Hitler, could I have your autograph? And Norma Jean takes a pad of paper from the man, and she says, Certainly, young man. I'd be happy to. So as she begins to sign the pad of paper, the man asks, Are you excited about going back to the United States? And she replies, Not really. America has such sad memories for me. All my friends are here now. Then we see her signature on the pad of paper, and it reads Norma Jean Baker, who, if you didn't know, is the real name of the actress and starlet Marilyn Monroe. So she hands the pad of paper back to the man, and then her and the Chancellor walk towards their limousine, and as she does, she waves to all the men, and Alois opens the door for her and says, Come on, Norma Jean. You know it's best to leave history in the past. Then we cut to the Air Force One blimp, and we see inside that the president is reading a book. I'm not sure if it's one of the ones from his library, but the narration says, He should have been on top of the world. He was the president of the United States, after all. Even now, it still meant something. His country was a success, a golden land of opportunity where no one slept on the streets or looked for work. America was a leading nation in a perfect world, a planet without hunger or disease, where man had learned to live in harmony with nature and with himself, where peace had prevailed for almost half a century. And yet, so as it's talking about how peace has prevailed, we do get a little sample of what life is like in America, as we see like a bunch of people hanging out in a park. Now, it does look all pretty and happy and stuff, but there's a statue of Hitler in the middle of it. All the buildings behind the people look very nice, but they also look like they have a lot of Nazi iconography on them. And we can see that all the people in the park, they look happy, but they're all white, of course. And we see the younger people in what looks like Hitler Youth uniforms. And as we see this, we see that the president isn't necessarily one of these happy people. That's why it said, and yet. He should be happy. I mean, this is a perfect world, right? But then as we turn the page, we see a horrific scene from World War II where Jews are being dismembered and thrown into ovens. And the narration continues, and yet his dreams were still haunted by nightmare images of the past. Gold fillings twinkling in mountains of teeth. Death camps filled high with jawless men. Women and children burned in German stoves. Their last shits hosed from the gas chamber floor. And the medical experiments. And at this, we get a panel of what looks like Nazi scientists trying to put a pig's head on a human body along with replacing the hands for hooves. And the narration continues. Given an infinite supply of living human bodies, the scientists worked night and day, their experiments limited only by their fertile imaginations. And for what? Were their aspirations for a better world so high they had climbed on the backs of 1 billion dead to reach them? So as the president is pondering this, he's kind of chewing on his glasses, thinking about all of this horror. Air Force One lands, and as the president gets out, we see there's a bunch of soldiers waiting for him, and they're all wearing the Nazi uniforms. We also see a woman waiting for him, and that woman is Anna, the girl whose story this is. Because if you remember, her and Swamp Thing are both going through each of these stories together. And we see one of the soldiers say, as the president gets out of the blimp, "Ladies and gentlemen, the President of the United States of America." And it is pouring rain outside, so Anna is standing under an umbrella as she waits for the president to get off, and she says, "Christ, do we have to do this every time he comes home for supper?" So as the president walks towards Anna, we get some narration that says, "The papers called him the 11th president, but in truth, he was the 41st. It's just that no one was allowed to talk about the others. Anna kissed him like a visiting head of state. There was no love between them, not anymore. In fact, he had suspected she was sleeping with Carl, the dog handler. All in all, the world wasn't a very nice place for the president." And in the panels under this narration, we do see him try to kiss her, and she kind of wince and turn away. And then Carl, the dog handler, walking behind him with his German shepherds, and Anna looking at him significantly. Then we see a commanding soldier hand the president an umbrella, and he says, "The golem is now operational, sir. Would you like a demonstration before tomorrow's state visit?" And as the president walks up the steps to the house, he says, "Yes, of course. That's why we came home early, after all." Then we turn the page and we cut to Swamp Thing, who is in the green in this reality, and he's having trouble understanding what's going on. As he senses the earth and the plants on it and stuff, his narration says, "There is something wrong with the world. The earth feels so healthy and alive. Its soil rich with goodness and vital nutrients. Its atmosphere pure and free from all pollutants. It's almost unrecognizable to me. Even here in the green, there are subtle differences to be found. I have entered yet another reality. Is this world a step beyond even the strange New Orleans I left behind?" I close my eyes, and for a moment, 1 billion lost souls cry for help in the darkness. The moment passes and I move on, looking for a place to grow. Otherworldly Arkansas, not knowing what I can expect when I arrive. Then we turn the page and we see Swamp Thing arriving, and he is in a strange body. It does look like Swamp Thing, but he is getting up off his knees on a wooden floor in the middle of a room, and he has a medallion in the middle of his chest that has the Star of David on it, and also a helmet that has the Star of David that says Ameth written on his forehead, and he has some shoulder armor that also has the Star of David as well. So it's almost like he didn't grow this body. Something happened, and all of a sudden he just kind of appeared in this form. Because as he looks down at himself, he looks just as shocked as he kind of examines his body, and we see he's not alone in the room. Standing in front of him is the president, who says, "Hello there. I imagine you must be kind of wondering where you are. Do you like your new body? We grew it from plant-based fractal organisms instead of the traditional clay. You should find it pretty comfortable to move around in." And as the president looks at Swamp Thing, examining him, he says, "Absolutely amazing." And so far, Swamp Thing doesn't say anything. He just kind of stares slackjaw at the president. And I think he's just trying to take everything in, because the president is standing in front of him wearing a Nazi uniform, and behind him is a big Nazi flag on the wall. So he's probably like, what the heck's going on? So the president reaches out and touches the forehead of the helmet that's on Swamp Thing's head, and he says, "It's hard to believe it just took one word from the Kabbalah to summon you here. Just one magic word from a little book in the Forbidden Library. Emeth, the Hebrew word for truth." And as I said, that is the word that is written on the helmet on Swamp Thing's forehead. So Swamp Thing stands up and he asks, "Who are you? What do you want with me?" And the president answers, "I'm sorry, where are my manners? Please, allow me to introduce myself. I'm the Fuhrer's little whipping boy, the President of the United States of America, the king of the shit heap." And then he gestures to some pictures on the wall in the room, but it seems like Swamp Thing doesn't quite see all what's going on. because he still hasn't asked about the Nazi flag or the uniform or the pictures of Hitler on the wall. He just says to the president, "What do you mean? This world flourishes as nature intended. Its ecosystem is in perfect working order. You should be happy to rule such a civilized society." And this angers the president very much. He walks over to his desk and he hits a bunch of books and papers off of it, and he says, "Civilized? Dear God, do you have any idea how many bones this place was built on? Christ, do you know how many people died in the name of perfection? No one knows, damn it. Nobody's allowed to know except me." And at this, Swamp Thing walks over to the president and puts his hand on his shoulder and says, "I think a mistake has been made regarding my identity. Who do you believe I am?" And the president says, "What are you talking about? You're the Golem, aren't you? The Jewish spirit of vengeance. It said so in the Kabbalah. I told the Fuhrer you were the solution to the world's energy crisis. He thought we were building you as an access point into the spirit world. You know, siphon off the psychic energy as a cheap source of fuel." Then the president kind of slowly walks over to the window, and we can see there's tears in his eyes, I'm assuming because he's the only one who knows how many people died to build this perfect Nazi society. And as he looks out the window, he says, "Stupid bastard. He never figured out what I was really up to." And Swamp Thing asks, "And what is that? What is the real reason you brought me here?" And as the president wipes away a tear, he says, "Oh, come on, you haven't guessed? I want you to destroy this world. It's as simple as that." And Swamp Thing seems very shocked at this. He says, "You mean you want me to murder an entire planet?" And the president replies, "For God's sake, haven't you been listening? The world's already dead. It died 50 years ago. The wrong side won the war. One man sentenced half the planet to death, and his hateful son is coming to visit us tomorrow. Doesn't that mean anything to you? The world wasn't meant to be like this. I can feel it in my heart. It's all wrong." Then he covers his eyes again with his hands as he begins to weep, and he says, "Oh God, please do it. I can't live with this anymore." And then he looks up at Swamp Thing kind of begging, and Swamp Thing looks at him very seriously and says, "If this world you described is indeed a testament to suffering and violence, then I will do this terrible thing you ask. I swear I shall destroy this evil place. Give me one night to consider this decision, and if you speak the truth, the end will come the moment your Fuhrer arrives." Then we cut to the outside of the building, where we see Anna is making out with the dog handler Carl. And as they finish kissing, she says, "Oh God, I can't believe we did that. I've wanted to for such a long time, but..." And then Carl interjects, "It felt good, didn't it? There's no need to feel guilty." And we can see as they finish embracing that their clothes were untucked and disheveled, and she was topless except her bra. So he tucks in his shirt and buckles his belt, and she puts on her shirt. And as she walks away, she says, "I'd better go, Carl. He's going to be wondering where I am. I'll speak to you tomorrow, okay?" And Carl says, "Sure. Love you." And as she walks back to the house, we see that Swamp Thing is looking through the window in the room that he was talking to the president in. And for the first time, he sees Anna walking in the rain towards the house. And he says out loud, "Anna?" And she sees something in the window, and she says, "Who is that? Who's there?" And then she sees his piercing red eyes staring out at her, and she says, "Alec? Oh my God." But behind her, we see a guard approaching, and he illuminates her with the beam of his flashlight, and he says, "Excuse me, ma'am, are you feeling okay?" And he's asking that because she is drenched, because she's standing outside in the rain without a jacket or an umbrella or anything. So as she recovers from seeing Swamp Thing, she says, "What? Oh, I'm okay. Honestly, I'm fine." And the guard replies, "I think you better get out of the rain, ma'am. We've got a big day ahead of us tomorrow." And she says, Yes, of course. You're right. I'm really sorry about all this. I just thought I saw someone I knew." Then we cut to the next day, where there's a giant assembly of people waiting for the Fuhrer to arrive. We see Anna is all dressed up in fancy First Lady clothes. And of course, she's surrounded by American Nazi officers on the stage. And also Carl is there with one of his dogs. So the president's handler is standing on the stage as well. And he's looking down at his watch impatiently. And he says, "I wonder what's keeping the president. He should have been here 20 minutes ago." And Anna, who's just standing there very proper, says, "Oh, you know him, Patrick. He's probably standing in front of the mirror practicing his goose step. Then Patrick looks over and he notices some small bruises on her neck, which are hickeys from her tryst with Carl last night. And he asks, "Say, what happened to your neck, ma'am? It's all purple and kind of bruised." And she looks down ashamed and says, "What? Oh, you mean this? Well, I guess it must have been one of those dogs or something." And then we see Carl beginning to blush, and he kind of pulls on his collar. And I guess, trying to get away from the situation, Anna says, "Wait here a minute. I'll go see what's keeping our glorious leader." So she walks off the stage. Then we cut to a swampy area close by, and we see the president is standing in knee-high water, and he is not ready at all for the Fuhrer to come. He's wearing a sleeveless undershirt and some black slacks with suspenders holding them up, and Swamp Thing is walking away from him in the water, and the president is yelling, "Hey, come back here! Where do you think you're going?" And Swamp Thing calls back, "I have business upriver." And the president asks, "What are you talking about? I thought you were going to kill everybody. You promised you were going to destroy the world." And Swamp Thing pauses and turns and says, "I am sorry. I cannot do as you ask." And the president replies, "What? Oh, come on. The Fuhrer's going to be here any minute." And Swamp Thing looks at him and says, "Last night, I saw the tenderness between a man and a woman standing in the rain. An act of love I did not think could exist in the world you described with such hate. I realized then that this world contains both evil people and good. They should not all suffer for the sins of their father. One Holocaust does not justify another." And the president is very taken aback by this, and he says, "You mean you aren't going to do anything?" And Swamp Thing replies, "The genocide which occurred here was beyond description, but you should not forget that most of the killing was done by men long ago. Allow this new generation to live their lives and use your position in this world to make sure such atrocities never happen again." And then the president begins to cry and he says, "Oh God, it's just that all those things I read about in the Forbidden Library. I didn't want to hurt anybody. I only wanted to do what was right." And then Swamp Thing reaches out really quickly and grabs the president's arm, and he says, "Then wipe this word from my brow. Grant me my freedom once again." And then he gets in the president's face and says, "Now! Do it now!" Then we cut to Anna, who is walking through the swampy area on the banks, and she sees some movement coming from the water, and she says, "Honey, is that you, honey? I thought I could hear voices out here." And then she looks around the edge of a tree, and she sees her husband and says, "Oh," because she's surprised he's not dressed, and he's just like walking around in the swamp. But he is coming up from the water now, and as he walks onto the bank, we see he's holding the helmet of Swamp Thing, and he's saying, "It's okay, Anna. I wiped the first letter from its head. The golem's gone forever." And then he holds the helmet out to her so he can show her the word on the helmet now. And like he said, he erased the first letter, which was E, where it used to say emeth. Now it just says meth. And as Anna reads it, she asks, "Meth, what does that mean?" And the president replies, "It means death, Anna. It's the Hebrew word for death, the opposite of truth." And then he takes the helmet and he throws it as hard as he can back into the water. And as he wipes his sweaty head, she asks him, "What about Chancellor Hitler? He's expecting to see a demonstration of what the creature can do." And as he puts one hand around her shoulder and they begin to walk back, the president says, "The Fuhrer should know better than anyone, darling. It's best to leave history in the past." And in this panel, we can see them far off, and we're kind of more focused on the water in front where the helmet landed, and there's some bubbles disturbing the surface of the water. Then we cut to Hitler Jr.'s blimp, and we see the president is shaking his hand, and the president saying, "Welcome to America, Chancellor Hitler. I hope you had a pleasant flight." And Hitler replies, "Not too bad. We watched one of the London manga cartoons to pass the time. The British fascination with the end of the world is most intriguing. Still, I suppose my father's to blame for dropping the bomb on them, eh?" And he says this with a very evil smile on his face. Then we see the president and his wife Anna walking by Carl and a couple other soldiers, and she directs one of her waves towards Carl, and one of the soldiers next to him elbows him and says, "Holy shit, she smiled at you. You did it, you dirty bastard. You poked the first lady." And with a big smile on his face, Carl answers him saying, No sweat, buddy. I told you I could. I think you owe me a bottle of whiskey. So we see Swamp Thing might have been wrong in the love between Carl and Anna being so pure. Then we cut to the president and Hitler Jr. walking inside the house, and Hitler saying, "Tell me a little more about the golem you built for us, Mr. President. I hear my doctor friend Woodrow designed its basic form." And the president answers, yes, he did. Although I don't think he managed to summon the real golem. It looked more like an elemental spirit to me, so I set it free. In fact, I decided to abandon the whole project this morning. You were right, Chancellor Hitler. Summoning such an ancient spirit involves too many risks. And Hitler replies, I assume you disposed of the host's body in the appropriate manner. And the president asks, what do you mean? And Hitler replies, I mean, we wouldn't want the spirit of the real golem showing up in the elemental's place. Then the president looks very freaked out as he realizes what he's done, and he says, oh God, I just left it lying in the river. And Hitler Jr. says, you idiot! What have you done? Then we get some narration that says, outside, the golem rose from its watery grave and opened its terrible mouth. All at once, a billion voices screamed in the dark for revenge, and a world that should have never been finally died. And as we turn the page, we see a full splash page of the ruins of this Nazi society, and we see there are a bunch of vines with thorns that have overgrown all the buildings and crushed all the statues, and we see tangled in the vines and the thorns are the bones of all the people that it killed. So the president got what he wanted in the end, and the golem did rise and murder all the people in this world. And that, my friends, is the end of the issue. So if you guys have any comments, questions, or suggestions, you can email me at planestrains.and-comicbooks, all one word, @gmail.com. And remember, until next time, stay swampy.